The forest swallowed her screams as the phone shattered against the rock. Ellie, barely 20, stood frozen, her breath visible in the cold Virginia air, watching the shards of her lifeline scatter across the moss. Her father's voice still echoed in her mind. "You're a disgrace. Ellen. Get out." She hadn't expected it to end like this. Not tonight. Not with her girlfriend, Mara, trembling beside her, their hands clasped so tightly it hurt. They'd been caught. Her father had found the letters, the ones Mara had written, tucked under Ellie's mattress. Love letters, raw and unguarded, confessing everything two young women in a small, conservative town dared not say aloud. He dragged them both to this forest, an hour from their hometown of Roanoke, his face a mask of rage. "You think you can live like this under my roof?" He'd spat, before smashing Ellie's phone and leaving them there, stranded, with nothing but a backpack in each other. The silence now was deafening. Mara's dark eyes glistened with tears, but her jaw was set. "We're not going back," she whispered, her voice steady despite the fear. Ellie nodded, her throat tight. They were alone, but they were together. That was enough for now. The forest loomed around them, dense and unyielding, the kind of place where secrets could be buried forever. Ellie's sneakers sank into the damp earth as she pulled Mara forward, her heart pounding. They had no plan, no money, no phone. Just the clothes on their backs and a desperate need to survive. The weight of her father's rejection pressed against her chest, but Mara's hand in hers was an anchor. They'd make it. They had to. Roanoke wasn't a place for people like them. The town's churches preached fire and brimstone, and Ellie's family, devout, rigid, and proud, had always been the loudest. Her father, a deacon, had raised her on scripture and discipline, his love conditional on her obedience. Her mother, quieter but no less complicit, had stood by as he threw Ellie out. Her younger sister, Lily, only 16, had watched from the doorway, her eyes wide with something Ellie couldn't read: fear, maybe, or guilt. Ellie had wanted to scream at her, to say something, to stand up for her. But Lily had stayed silent. That silence cut deeper than her father's words. Mara, on the other hand, came from a different kind of struggle. Her parents, immigrants from Guatemala, had their own expectations, but they'd been more forgiving until they found out about Ellie. Mara's mother had cried, begged her to fix herself, but it was her father who'd called Ellie's dad, setting this nightmare in motion. Now, here they were, two women cast out for loving each other, with nowhere to go. "We need to move," Mara said, her voice pulling Ellie back to the present. The forest was growing darker, the air colder. Ellie nodded, scanning the trees for a path. They'd heard rumors of a shelter in Lynchburg, about 50 miles away, that took in runaways. No questions asked. It was their best shot. But 50 miles on foot, through unfamiliar terrain, with no map or food, the odds felt impossible. They walked for hours, the forest unrelenting. Ellie's legs ached, and Mara's breathing grew ragged, but they didn't stop. They couldn't. Every snap of a twig made Ellie flinch, half expecting her father to come back, to finish what he'd started. But the only sounds were their footsteps and the distant hoot of an owl. Mara hummed softly, a habit she had when nervous, and Ellie clung to the sound like a lifeline. By midnight, they stumbled upon a clearing. A small stream ran through it, the water glinting under the moonlight. Ellie dropped to her knees, splashing her face, the cold shocking her awake. Mara sat beside her, pulling a granola bar from her backpack, their only food. She broke it in half, handing Ellie the larger piece. "We're gonna be okay," Mara said, her voice soft but fierce. Ellie wanted to believe her. They curled up together under a tree, using Mara's jacket as a blanket. Ellie's mind raced images of her father's face, her sister's silence, the shattered phone. But Mara's warmth against her side grounded her. "I love you," Ellie whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Mara's lips curved into a small smile. "I love you too. Always will." The next morning, they woke to the sound of birds. Ellie's body ached, but Mara's determination was infectious. They followed the stream, hoping it would lead to a road. Hours later, it died a narrow, gravelly path barely wide enough for a car. A rusted sign pointed toward Lynchburg. Relief flooded Ellie, but it was short-lived. They were still miles from safety, and the world beyond the forest wasn't guaranteed to be kind. As they walked, Mara talked about her dreams opening a coffee shop one day, a place where people like them could feel safe. Ellie listened, her heart swelling. Mara's optimism was a light in the darkness, and Ellie vowed to protect it. She didn't know how they'd survive, but she knew she'd do anything to keep Mara safe. By late afternoon, they reached a gas station, the first sign of civilization. The clerk, an older woman with kind eyes, noticed their disheveled state. "You girls okay?" she asked, her voice gentle. Ellie hesitated, but Mara spoke up. "We're trying to get to Lynchburg. To a shelter." The woman nodded, no judgment in her eyes. She gave them water, a map, and directions to a bus stop a mile away. "Be careful," she said, slipping them a few dollars. Not everyone's kind. The bus ride to Lynchburg was quiet, the weight of the last 24 hours settling over them. Ellie stared out the window, the rolling hills blurring past. She thought of her family, of the home she'd lost. But then Mara's hand found hers, and she remembered what she'd gained. They were outcasts, yes, but they were free. Free to love, to fight, to build a life together. The shelter was just the beginning. The shelter in Lynchburg was a squat, brick building tucked behind a strip mall. Its sign faded but welcoming, Hope Haven. Ellie and Mara stepped inside, their hands still clasped, the weight of the forest still clinging to their clothes. The woman at the front desk, Clara, had a warm smile that didn't quite hide the exhaustion in her eyes. "You're safe here," she said, handing them intake forms. Ellie felt a knot loosen in her chest, but the fear lingered. Safety was temporary, and the world outside these walls was still a minefield. Hope Haven was crowded, filled with kids their age and younger runaways, throwaways, kids who didn't fit into the boxes their families demanded. Ellie and Mara were given a shared bunk in a room with 6 others, the air thick with the scent of cheap soap and desperation. They didn't talk much that first night, just lay side by side, listening to the soft snores and occasional sobs around them. Ellie traced the outline of Mara's hand under the thin blanket, grounding herself in the only thing that felt real. Days turned into weeks. The shelter gave them structure meals, job counseling, a chance to shower and feel human again. Ellie found work at a diner nearby, washing dishes for minimum wage. The grease and heat were brutal, but the tips she split with the waitresses kept them afloat. Mara, with her quick mind and charm, landed a job at a bookstore, shelving novels and sneaking poetry collections to read during breaks. They saved every penny, dreaming of a place of their own, somewhere no one could tear them apart. But the world wasn't done testing them. Lynchburg wasn't Roanoke, but it wasn't San Francisco either. The diner's regulars whispered when Ellie picked up Mara after her shift, their hands brushing as they walked away. One night, a drunk customer followed them out, slurring slurs and threats. Mara pulled Ellie close, her voice steady. "Ignore him. He's nothing." But Ellie's heart raced, the memory of her father's rage flashing in her mind. They walked faster, disappearing into the night, but the encounter left scars. At the shelter, they found allies. Jamie, a trans kid with a sharp wit, taught them how to navigate the city's underbelly, where to find free clinics, which streets to avoid. Sarah, a quiet girl with scars on her wrists, shared her snacks and stories of her own escape from a family like Ellie's. Together, they formed a makeshift family, bound by survival and unspoken understanding. Ellie began to see a future, fragile but possible, where she and Mara could thrive. Mara's optimism kept them going. She'd sketch coffee shop layouts on napkins, describing cozy corners with bookshelves and fairy lights. "We'll call it Haven," she'd say, her eyes bright. "A place for us." Ellie would nod, her heart aching with love and fear. She wanted to believe in Mara's dreams, but the weight of their reality bills, prejudice, the constant grind made it hard. One evening, after a long shift, Ellie found Mara sitting on their bunk, holding a letter. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. "It's from my mom," Mara said, her voice barely above a whisper. The letter was short, written in careful English. "Come home, Mija. We miss you. It can be different." Ellie's stomach twisted. She wanted to tear the letter apart, to scream that Mara's family didn't deserve her. But Mara's eyes were distant, torn. "They're my family," she said softly. "What if they mean it?" Ellie felt a pang of betrayal, though she hid it. "Do you want to go back?" she asked, her voice tight. Mara shook her head, but the hesitation lingered. That night, they argued for the first time. Ellie's fear spilled out, fear of losing Mara, of being alone again. "They threw you out, Mara, just like mine did. Why trust them now?" Mara's eyes filled with tears. "Because they're all I have besides you." The words stung, but Ellie understood. Family, even one that hurt you, had a pull that was hard to break. They made up by morning, apologies whispered in the dark. But the letter lingered like a shadow. Ellie started noticing Mara's silences, the way she'd stare at nothing during their walks. She wondered if Mara was rethinking everything: their life, their love, their future. The thought terrified her, but she didn't know how to fix it. Months passed, and they moved out of the shelter into a tiny studio apartment. A single room with peeling paint and a leaky faucet. It was theirs, though, paid for with their sweat and stubbornness. They celebrated with cheap wine and a mattress on the floor, laughing until they cried. For a moment, Ellie felt invincible. They were building something real, something no one could take away. But the world kept pushing back. Ellie's boss at the diner cut her hours, citing customer complaints about her attitude. She knew it was code for her being too open about Mara. Mara's bookstore job was steadier, but the pay was barely enough for one, let alone two. They skipped meals to make rent, and Ellie's dreams of college, once so vivid, faded into the background. Still, they had each other. That had to be enough. One night, Mara came home with a flyer for a local LGBTQ support group. "We should go," she said, her voice hopeful. Ellie hesitated. She'd never been one for groups, for sharing her pain with strangers. But Mara's excitement was contagious, and Ellie agreed. The group met in a community center, a mix of people from all walks: teens, adults, some with families who'd accepted them, others who'd lost everything. For the first time, Ellie felt seen. Not judged. Not pitted. Just seen. She held Mara's hand tighter, grateful for the woman who'd walked through hell with her. The community center became their sanctuary. Every Thursday, Ellie and Mara joined the circle of folding chairs, listening to stories that mirrored their own rejection, resilience, and the slow climb toward self-acceptance. Ellie, usually guarded, started opening up. She spoke of the forest, the shattered phone, her father's rage. The group listened, nodded, offered no easy answers but plenty of empathy. Mara thrived there, her natural warmth drawing people in. She'd joke, share ideas for her dream coffee shop, and Ellie would watch, proud but protective, always scanning for threats. Life outside the group was harder. The diner fired Ellie after a customer complained about her lifestyle, showing too much, kissed Mara goodbye outside the restaurant. The loss stung, not just for the money but for the reminder that their love was still a target. Mara picked up extra shifts at the bookstore, but the strain showed. Her smiles were rarer, her sketches of Haven less frequent. Ellie took odd jobs cleaning houses, stocking shelves, anything to keep them afloat. They were surviving, but barely. One night, Mara came home with news. The bookstore's hosting a poetry slam, she said, eyes bright for the first time in weeks. I signed us up. Ellie froze. She'd never been good with words. Not like Mara, who could weave stories that made people lean in. But Mara's excitement was contagious. And Ellie agreed, if only to see her smile again. They spent nights crafting a piece together. A poem about the forest. About love that refused to break. When they performed it, their voices weaving together under the dim lights, the room erupted in applause. For a moment, Ellie felt like they'd won something bigger than a competition. The poetry slam opened doors. A local artist, impressed by their performance, offered Mara a gig designing posters for community events. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Ellie found work at a queer-friendly cafe, where the manager didn't care who she loved as long as she showed up on time. Slowly, they rebuilt. Their apartment gained small to chase a second-hand couch. A string of fairy lights Mara insisted on. It wasn't Haven, but it was home. Yet the past wouldn't stay buried. One afternoon, while Ellie was wiping down tables at the cafe, a familiar face walked in. Lily, her younger sister, now 18. Ellie's heart stopped. Lily looked different, taller. Her hair dyed blonde, but her eyes still held that same unreadable mix of fear and guilt. Ellie, she said, her voice small. I didn't know where else to find you. Ellie wanted to run, to scream, to demand why Lily hadn't spoken up that night in Roanoke. Instead, she led her to a quiet corner. Lily explained. Their father was sick, lung cancer. Aggressive. Their mother was a wreck, barely coping. They want to see you, Lily said. They're sorry. Ellie's chest tightened. Sorry. After everything. She thought of the forest, the cold, the shattered phone. They don't get to be sorry now, she said, her voice shaking. Lily didn't push. She left a phone number and an address, then walked out. Ellie stood frozen, the cafe's hum fading into the background. When she told Mara that night, Mara listened quietly, then took her hand. You don't owe them anything, she said. But if you want to see them, I'll go with you. Ellie didn't know what she wanted. The idea of facing her family again felt like walking back into the forest, unarmed. Weeks passed, and Ellie wrestled with the decision. She carried Lily's note in her pocket, the paper worn from her fingers tracing the numbers. Part of her wanted closure, to confront her father's cruelty. Another part wanted to leave it all behind, to protect the fragile life she and Mara had built. The support group helped stories of others who'd faced their families, some finding reconciliation, others finding only more pain. Ellie wasn't sure what she'd get. Mara, meanwhile, was thriving. Her poster designs caught attention, and she started freelancing for local businesses. She talked about Haven again, her sketches more detailed, her voice alive with possibility. Ellie loved seeing her like this, but the shadow of her family's request loomed. She didn't tell Mara how often she thought about Roanoke, how the weight of her father's sickness tugged at her. She didn't want to burden her. One night, after a long shift, Ellie found Mara asleep on the couch, a sketchbook open to a drawing of Haven's storefront. Ellie's heart swelled, but it also ached. She wanted this life, Mara. Haven, a future free from the past. But Lily's words echoed, "They're sorry." Were they? Or was it just desperation, now that they needed her? Ellie sat beside Mara, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She didn't have answers, but she had Mara. That was her constant. The decision came unexpectedly. A letter arrived, not from Lily but from her mother. It was short, shaky handwriting on cheap paper. "Ellen, please come home. Your father doesn't have long. We were wrong." Ellie read it over and over, each word a knife. She showed it to Mara, who held her as she cried. "I need to go," Ellie said finally. "Not for them. For me." Mara nodded, her eyes steady. "Then we'll go together." They booked a bus to Roanoke, the same route they'd taken to escape years ago. As the bus rolled through the Virginia hills, Ellie's stomach churned. She didn't know what she'd find: forgiveness, rejection, or something in between. But Mara's hand in hers was a reminder, whatever happened, they'd face it together. The bus to Roanoke smelled of diesel and stale coffee, each mile pulling Ellie closer to a past she'd tried to bury. Mara sat beside her, sketching in her notebook, her presence a quiet strength. Ellie stared out the window, the familiar Virginia hills stirring memories of that night in the Forester father's rage. The shattered phone, Mara's hand pulling her through the dark. Now, 3 years later, she was returning, not as the scared girl who'd been cast out, but as someone stronger, someone who'd built a life despite it all. Roanoke hadn't changed much. The same churches lined the streets, their steeples piercing the sky like accusations. Ellie's childhood home looked smaller than she remembered, the paint peeling, the lawn overgrown. Her stomach twisted as she knocked, Mara's hand brushing her back. The door opened, and there was her mother, older now, her face lined with grief. "Ellen," she whispered, stepping aside. Ellie nodded, unable to speak, and they entered. Her father was in the living room, a shadow of the man he'd been. Cancer had hollowed him out, his once imposing frame frail under a blanket. His eyes, though, still held that sharp intensity. "You came," he rasped. Ellie stood stiffly, Mara at her side. "I didn't come for you," she said, her voice steady. "I came for me." His face flickered regret, maybe, or shame, but he said nothing. Her mother fussed, offering tea, her hands trembling. Lily lingered in the doorway, her eyes darting between Ellie and their father. The air was thick with unspoken words. Ellie wanted to scream, to demand why they'd thrown her out, why they'd chosen dogma over their daughter. Instead, she sat, Mara's presence grounding her. "Why now?" Ellie asked finally. Her mother's eyes filled with tears. "We were wrong, Ellen. We see that now. Your father, he wants to make things right." Ellie didn't believe it. Not fully. Her father's silence felt like a wall. His apology if it was one locked behind his pride. But her mother's desperation was real. And Lily's guilt was palpable. They needed her. Not just for forgiveness but for practical help, hospital bills, errands, the weight of a dying man. Ellie felt a strange mix of pity and anger. They'd abandoned her. Yet here she was. Their last hope. Mara, quiet until now, spoke up. Ellie doesn't owe you anything. She's here because she's stronger than you ever gave her credit for. Her words cut through the room. And Ellie's heart swelled. Her father's eyes flickered to Mara. Then away. He didn't argue. For the first time, Ellie saw him as small. Not the towering figure of her nightmares. They stayed for a week, helping where they could. Ellie ran errands, paid bills with their meager savings, and sat by her father's bedside, though they rarely spoke. His apologies came in fragments. A muttered, "I was wrong" one night, a shaky hand reaching for hers another. Ellie didn't forgive him. Not yet. But she listened. It was more than she'd expected. Lily was different. She followed Ellie around, hesitant, like she was afraid to break something fragile. One night, as they sorted through medical papers, Lily broke down. "I should have said something," she sobbed. "That night, when he kicked you out, I was scared." Ellie's throat tightened. She wanted to stay angry, but Lily was just a kid back then, caught in the same suffocating house. "You're saying something now," Ellie said, pulling her into a hug. It wasn't forgiveness. Not fully. But it was a start. Mara was Ellie's rock, navigating the tension with grace. She charmed the neighbors, deflecting their curious stares, and kept Ellie grounded with late-night talks. One evening, as they walked through Roanoke's quiet streets, Mara stopped under a streetlight. "You're doing this for you, not them," she said, her voice fierce. "Don't forget that." Ellie nodded, kissing her softly, not caring who saw. This was their strength, their love, unapologetic and unbreakable. When her father died, it was quiet. No dramatic confessions, no tearful reconciliation. Just a man slipping away, leaving behind a fractured family. Ellie felt hollow, not the relief she'd expected. Her mother begged her to stay, to rebuild what they'd lost. But Ellie knew she couldn't. Roanoke wasn't home anymore. Home was the life she and Mara had fought for, the one they were still building. They returned to Lynchburg, the bus ride back quieter than the one there. Ellie felt lighter, not because she'd forgiven her family, but because she'd faced them. She'd seen their flaws, their regrets, and realized she didn't need their approval to be whole. Mara, sensing her shift, squeezed her hand. "You okay?" she asked. Ellie nodded. "Yeah, think I am." Back in their apartment, life resumed its rhythm. Mara's freelance work grew, her designs now on cafe menus and event flyers across town. Ellie's cafe job became steadier, and she started taking night classes, chasing the college dream she'd thought was lost. They saved for Haven, their dream coffee shop, each dollar a step toward freedom. The past still lingered. Ellie's mother called sometimes, and Lily sent letters, but it no longer defined them. One night, as they lay in bed, Mara traced circles on Ellie's arm. "We made it," she whispered. "Through the forest. Through all of it." Ellie smiled, her heart full. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were living. 2 years later, Lynchburg felt like home in a way Roanoke never had. Ellie, now 23, stood behind the counter of the cafe, her apron stained with espresso, her smile genuine. "Mara, 24, was thriving. Her freelance designs turning heads across the city. Their apartment, once bare, was filled with life plants Mara tended like children, bookshelves stuffed with poetry, and sketches of Haven pinned to the walls. They were close, so close, to making that dream real. But the past had a way of creeping back, uninvited. Ellie's mother called more often now, her voice softer, less desperate but still heavy with guilt. Lily visited once, staying for a weekend, her eyes wide at the life Ellie and Mara had built. She apologized again, and this time, Ellie forgave her, not because it was easy but because holding on to anger felt like carrying dead weight. Her mother was harder. The calls were polite, careful, but Ellie kept her distance. She didn't trust the change. Not fully. One morning, a letter arrived. Not from her mother but from a lawyer in Roanoke. Her father's estate small. Mostly debts had left something for Ellie, a savings account, untouched for years, with $10,000. The note attached was in her father's handwriting, dated before his diagnosis for Ellen, if she ever comes back. Ellie stared at it, her chest tight. Was this his apology? His attempt to fix what he'd broken? She didn't know, and he wasn't here to explain. Mara found her sitting on the floor, the letter in her lap. "What do you want to do with it?" she asked, sitting beside her. Ellie didn't have an answer. The money felt like a trap, a tether to a man who'd cast her out. But it was also a chance, a boost toward Haven, toward their future. They talked late into the night, weighing the choice. "It's not his money anymore," Mara said finally. "It's yours. Use it to build something he couldn't destroy." Ellie nodded, the decision settling like a stone. They'd use it for Haven. The search for a space began. They scoured Lynchburg, visiting empty storefronts, imagining counters and cozy corners. One spot stood out, a small brick building downtown, with big windows and a faded sign. Needed work, but it felt right. They signed the lease with the inheritance money, their hands shaking as they handed over the deposit. Haven was no longer a sketch on a napkin. It was real. Renovations were grueling. Ellie and Mara spent weekends painting walls, sanding floors, their clothes dusted with sawdust. Friends from the support group pitched in, Jamie with his knack for carpentry, Sarah with her eye for decor. The community center donated old furniture, and Mara's designs gave the place soul. They hung fairy lights, just like Mara had always wanted, and built a bookshelf for poetry and queer literature. Ellie learned to make espresso, practicing until her shots were perfect. Haven was taking shape, a sanctuary for anyone who needed it. Opening day was chaos and joy. The line stretched down the block, a mix of regulars from the cafe, support group friends, and curious locals. Mara worked the counter, her smile radiant, while Ellie steamed milk and plated pastries. A queer couple, new to town, lingered in a corner, holding hands openly, their relief palpable. Ellie watched them, her heart swelling. This was why they'd fought for this place. But success brought attention, not all of it kind. A local church group picketed outside one morning, their signs preaching traditional values. Ellie's stomach sank, memories of Roanoke flooding back. Mara, unfazed, turned up the music inside, Janelle Monáe's anthems blaring, and invited the protesters in for free coffee. Most didn't come, but one did. A young man who looked uncomfortable, his sign left outside. He didn't say much, just sipped his latte and left. Ellie saw it as a small victory. The pickets didn't last, but the whispers did. Some locals avoided Haven, their stares cold when Ellie and Mara walked hand in hand. Others embraced it, turning Haven into a hub for artists, activists, and anyone who felt out of place. Mara started hosting open mic nights, and Ellie read poetry again, her voice stronger now. They were building more than a coffee shop, they were building a community. One evening, as they closed up, Mara pulled Ellie into a slow dance behind the counter, the fairy lights casting soft glows. "We did it," Mara whispered, her forehead against Ellie's. "We made it ours." Ellie kissed her, the taste of coffee lingering, and for the first time, she felt truly free. The forest, the rejection, the pine, it was still there, but it no longer defined her. Then, another letter arrived. This one was from her mother, but the tone was different, urgent, pleading. Lily was in trouble, said. She'd left home, gotten mixed up with the wrong people, and was missing. Her mother begged Ellie to help find her. The words hit like a punch. "You're her sister. She needs you." Ellie's first instinct was to say no, to protect the life she'd built. But Lily's face scared, guilty, hopeful flashed in her mind. She couldn't turn her back. Mara, as always, was ready. "We'll find her," she said, her voice steady. "Together." Ellie nodded, fear and resolve mixing in her chest. Haven was their dream, but family broken, messy, complicated still mattered. They'd face this, just like they'd faced everything else. Ellie clutched the letter, her mother's words burning in her mind. "Lily's missing. Please help." The cozy warmth of Haven, with its fairy lights and coffee-scented air, felt like a fragile bubble as she showed the letter to Mara. They sat at a corner table, the shop quiet after closing, the weight of the request settling between them. Mara's eyes scanned the page, her jaw tight. "We can't ignore this," she said, her voice steady but laced with worry. "She's your sister." Ellie nodded, though her heart churned. Lily had been a kid when Ellie was kicked out, too scared to speak up, but she tried to make amends since. The thought of her out there, lost or in danger, twisted Ellie's gut. She and Mara had built a life from nothing, survived the forest, the streets, the hate, but this was different. This was family, and family had a way of pulling you back, no matter how far you'd run. They started with what little they had. The letter mentioned Lily had been seen in Richmond, a 2-hour drive from Lynchburg. Ellie called her mother. Her voice clipped, asking for details. Her mother's sobs crackled through the phone. Lily had fallen in with a rough crowd. Maybe drugs. Maybe worse. She'd stopped answering calls a month ago. The police were no help, dismissing Lily as just another runaway. Ellie hung up, her hands shaking. She didn't trust her mother's desperation, but she couldn't abandon Lily. Mara took charge, as she always did when Ellie faltered. She reached out to their support group network, asking for leads in Richmond. Jamie, their friend from the shelter, had contacts there, people who knew the streets, the shelters, the places runaways ended up. "We'll go this weekend," Mara said, already mapping out a plan. Ellie marveled at her, at how she could face any storm with a steady hand. But beneath Mara's resolve, Ellie saw the strain. Haven was barely breaking even, and this trip would stretch them thin. They drove to Richmond in a borrowed car, the city skyline a stark contrast to Lynchburg's quiet streets. Ellie's nerves hummed as they checked shelters, showed Lily's photo to strangers, and followed leads that went nowhere. The city felt vast, unforgiving, each dead end a reminder of how easily someone could disappear. Mara kept them focused, her voice calm but firm. "We'll find her," she said, squeezing Ellie's hand. Ellie clung to that promise, though doubt gnawed at her. On the second day, A tip led them to a rundown motel on the city's outskirts. The clerk, a tired woman with a smoker's rasp, recognized Lily's photo. Yeah, she was here. Left with some guy a week ago. Shady type. Ellie's heart sank, but Mara pressed for more, slipping the clerk a 20. The woman gave them a name Darius and a vague description. Tall. Tattoos. Drove a black van. It wasn't much, but it was something. They tracked Darius through Jamie's contacts, landing at a dive bar in a gritty part of town. Ellie's stomach churned as they entered, the air thick with cigarette smoke and tension. Mara approached the bartender, her charm disarming, and got a lead. Darius hung out at an abandoned warehouse nearby, a spot known for trouble. Ellie wanted to run, to go back to Haven and pretend this wasn't her problem. But Mara's steady gaze held her. "We're doing this," she said. "For Lily." The warehouse was a maze of broken glass and shadows. Ellie's pulse raced as they moved through it, Mara's flashlight cutting through the dark. They heard voices, low and heated, and followed them to a back room. There was Lily thinner, her blonde hair tangled, her eyes wide with fear. Darius, a hulking figure with a snake tattoo curling up his arm, stood over her, arguing with another man. Ellie's instinct was to rush in, but Mara grabbed her arm. "We need a plan," she whispered. They waited, watching from the shadows. When Darius and the other man stepped outside, Ellie and Mara moved fast. "Lily," Ellie hissed, stepping into the room. Lily's head snapped up, relief and shame flooding her face. "Ellie," she whispered, scrambling to her feet. Mara checked the door, keeping watch. "We're getting you out," Ellie said, her voice firm despite the fear clawing at her. Lily didn't resist, but she was shaky, her eyes darting nervously. "I messed up," she mumbled as they hurried through the warehouse. Ellie didn't respond. She didn't have the words yet. They made it to the car, Mara driving as Ellie sat with Lily in the back, holding her hand. Lily's story came out in fragments, running from home, falling in with Darius, getting caught in a cycle of bad choices. Ellie listened, anger and pity warring inside her. They took Lily to a shelter in Richmond, one Jamie vouched for, with counselors who could help. Lily clung to Ellie, sobbing. "I'm sorry," she said, over and over. Ellie hugged her tightly, her own tears falling. "You're safe now," she said, meaning it. She didn't know if Lily would be okay, but she'd given her a chance. That was all she could do. Back in Lynchburg, Haven was waiting. The trip had drained their savings, and the picketers were back, angrier now, their signs more vicious. But Ellie felt stronger. She and Mara had faced the worst, her family, the forest. Now this, and they were still standing. Haven wasn't just a coffee shop anymore. It was a symbol of everything they'd fought for, everything they'd won. Haven stood strong despite the picketers, its windows glowing with fairy lights, a beacon in Lynchburg's heart. Ellie, now 24, wiped down the counter, her hands steady, her heart full. Mara, 25, was in the back, sketching new designs for their spring menu, her laughter mingling with the hum of the espresso machine. They'd been through hell, cast out, broke, hunted by their past, but here they were, thriving. The rescue of Lily had left them exhausted, financially strained, but unbroken. Haven was proof of that. Lily was safe now, in a Richmond rehab program, piecing herself back together. She called Ellie weekly, her voice stronger each time. "I'm trying," she'd say, and Ellie believed her. Their mother sent letters, less frequent now, her apologies softer but no less heavy. Ellie didn't always respond, but she read them, letting the words settle without letting them define her. Forgiveness was a process, not a destination, and she was still walking that road. The picketers hadn't given up, but their numbers dwindled. Haven's community was stronger regulars who'd become friends, artists who saw the shop as a canvas, queer kids who found safety in its walls. One evening, a teen named Alex, barely 16, came in, eyes downcast, and told Ellie they'd been kicked out for coming out as non-binary. Ellie listened, then slid a coffee across the counter. "Free. You're not alone," she said, echoing the words MS. Clara had told her years ago at Hope Haven. Alex came back the next day, and the next, finding a home in Haven's warmth. Mara's dream had grown beyond sketches. Haven hosted poetry slams, art shows, even a small pride event that spilled into the street. Rainbow flags waving under Lynchburg's sky. The city wasn't perfect, some still glared, whispered, crossed the street to avoid them, but it was changing. Slowly. Ellie and Mara were part of that change. Their love a quiet revolution. They turned their pain into purpose, their rejection into refuge. One spring morning, as cherry blossoms bloomed outside, Ellie found Mara in their apartment, surrounded by papers. "What's this?" Ellie asked, picking up a spreadsheet. Mara grinned, her eyes sparkling. "Expansion plans. Haven's doing better than we thought. We could open another location, Richmond. Maybe." Ellie's breath caught. Another Haven. The idea felt like a dream, but Mara's spreadsheets were real numbers. Projections. A future they could touch. They celebrated that night with wine and a dance in their tiny living room. Janelle Monáe playing softly. Ellie pulled Mara close, her heart full. "I didn't think we'd get here," she admitted, her voice thick. Mara kissed her, slow and sure. "We were always going to get here," she said. "We just had to fight for it." The next day, a familiar face walked into Haven. Lily, clean and sober, her smile tentative but real. She hugged Ellie tightly, then Mara, her gratitude unspoken but clear. "I'm staying in Richmond," she said. "Got a job, an apartment. I want to help with the new Haven." Ellie's eyes stung. Lily wasn't just her sister anymore. She was proof that people could change, that broken things could heal. As summer approached, Ellie and Mara scouted locations in Richmond, their hands clasped as they walked through potential storefronts. The city felt different now. Less daunting. More like a place they could claim. They chose a spot near the shelter where they'd left Lily. A full circle moment that made Ellie's chest ache with hope. They'd build another Haven. Another sanctuary. For Lily. For Alex. For anyone who needed it. The opening of Haven's Richmond location was a triumph. The crowd was bigger than Lynchburg's. The energy electric. Ellie worked the espresso machine. Mara greeted guests. And Lily helped serve. Her pride evident. The picketers showed up. As expected. But they were drowned out by the music. The laughter. The love that filled the space. Ellie looked out at the crowd, queer couples. Families. Allies. Strangers who'd become family and realized they'd done more than survive. They'd built something enduring. Years ago, in a forest outside Roanoke, Ellie's world had shattered with her phone. Her family's rejection had left her lost, but Mara's hand in hers had guided her through. Now, standing in Haven, surrounded by people who saw her, who loved her, Ellie knew the truth. Love wasn't just defiance. It was creation. It was the courage to build when everything else had been torn down. As the night wound down, Ellie and Mara stood outside the new Haven. the city lights reflecting in their eyes. "We did it," Ellie said, her voice steady. Mara smiled, pulling her close. "We're just getting started." And in that moment, Ellie knew they were. The forest was behind them. The future was theirs.